I never thought I would become the kind of person who installed security cameras around my house. But after 3 months of relentless anonymous complaints to the homeowners association about violations I never committed, I had reached my breaking point. My name is Ryan Kellerman, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Charlotte, North Carolina, for exactly 7 months when the harassment began. I bought the modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home after my divorce was finalized, needing a fresh start and a place where my 2 kids could visit on weekends. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first with its tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and the kind of quiet suburban atmosphere I craved after years of city apartment living. The HOA seemed reasonable enough during the home buying process, with standard rules about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and parking regulations. Nothing that seemed particularly oppressive or unreasonable. The first complaint letter arrived in mid-March, typed on official Meadowbrook Heights HOA letterhead and signed by Patricia Dunford, the HOA president. It stated that multiple residents had reported my trash, cans being left visible from the street on non-collection days, violating Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines. I read the letter twice, confused because I was meticulous about rolling my trash cans back to the side of my house within hours of collection every Thursday morning. I had made a point of reviewing all the HOA rules when I moved in, not wanting to start off on the wrong foot with my neighbors. I called the number listed on the letterhead and reached Patricia herself. Her voice was sharp and nasal, with the kind of tone that immediately put me on edge. "This is Patricia Dunford speaking." "Hi, Mrs. Dunford. This is Ryan Kellerman from 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. I received a letter about trash can violations, but I think there might be a mistake. I always bring my cans in the same day as collection. Mr. Kellerman, we have received multiple complaints from concerned residents. The HOA takes these matters very seriously. I understand, but I am bringing them in. Could you tell me what date these complaints were filed? Maybe there was one day I forgot and I can make sure it does not happen again." There was a pause on the line. "The complaints were anonymous, as is allowed under our bylaws. I suggest you pay closer attention to compliance in the future." "Anonymous? So someone could just say anything and I get a violation letter?" "The HOA has processes in place to verify complaints before sending official correspondence, Mr. Kellerman. I suggest you review the community guidelines more carefully. This is your first warning. A second violation will result in a fine of $100. She hung up before I could respond further. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, frustration building in my chest. But I decided to let it go. Maybe I had forgotten one Thursday and did not remember. I made a mental note to be even more careful about the trash cans. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one claimed my lawn had not been mowed within the required 10-day window, violating Section 7.2 of the guidelines. I stared at my perfectly manicured front yard, which I had mowed exactly 4 days earlier. The grass was barely 2 inches tall, well within the required height limits. This was not a mistake or a forgotten chore. This was someone deliberately lying about me. I took photos of my lawn with my phone, making sure to capture the timestamp, and drove to Patricia Dunford's house on Oakmont Circle. The address was listed on the HOA website as the official correspondence address. Her home was a large 2-story colonial with white columns and a front yard that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. A silver Lexus SUV sat in the driveway with a vanity plate that read, "Hoa Queen." I should have known right then what I was dealing with. Patricia answered the door wearing a lavender cardigan and pearl necklace. her blonde hair styled in that particular way that suburban women of a certain age seemed to favor, with too much volume and hairspray. She looked to be in her early 50s, with thin lips and sharp blue eyes that sized me up immediately. "Mr. Kellerman, what brings you to my door?" I received another violation letter, this one about my lawn not being mowed. "Mrs. Dunford, I mowed it 4 days ago." "Look, I have photos with timestamps." I held up my phone to show her. She barely glanced at the screen. "Photos can be manipulated, Mr. Kellerman. The HOA received complaints from multiple residents about the state of your property." "What residents? Can you tell me who is complaining?" "Anonymous complaints are protected under our bylaws. Now, if you will excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." She started to close the door. "This is harassment," I said, louder than I intended. "I am following every single rule in that guideline document. Someone is filing false reports." Patricia's expression hardened. "I would be very careful about making accusations, Mr. Kellerman. The HOA board takes defamation seriously. You have now received 2 official warnings. One more violation and you will begin receiving fines. I suggest you focus on compliance rather than conspiracy theories." The door closed in my face. I stood there on her perfect porch with its potted ferns and welcome mat, anger coursing through my veins. I was not a confrontational person by nature. The divorce had drained me of whatever fight I used to have. But something about Patricia's dismissive attitude and the obvious injustice of the situation sparked something in me I thought was long dead. Over the next month, the complaints escalated. I received violation notices for a non-existent oil stain on my driveway, for parking my car on the street overnight when it was actually in my garage, for having exterior lights that were supposedly too bright even though they were the same builder-installed fixtures that half the neighborhood had, and for placing landscaping decorations without prior approval when all I had was a standard bird bath that had been there when I bought the house. Each time, I called Patricia. Each time, she cited anonymous complaints and threatened escalating fines. By late April, I had accumulated 5 violation letters and a notice that I was on probationary status with the HOA, meaning the board could vote to place a lien on my property if I did not achieve compliance within 60 days. I consulted with a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb, whose office was downtown Charlotte. He reviewed all my documentation, the HOA bylaws, and the violation letters. "This is harassment, no question," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The problem is proving it. HOA bylaws that allow anonymous complaints are actually pretty common, and unless you can demonstrate that the complaints are false and being made maliciously by a specific person, you are stuck defending yourself against ghosts. So what do I do? Just keep taking photos and documentation." "That helps, but honestly, Ryan, what you need is evidence of who is making these complaints and proof that they know they are false. Without that, it becomes a he said, she said situation, and the HOA board almost always sides with the president in these disputes." "What if I installed security cameras? Would that help?" Marcus nodded slowly. "It could, yes. If you can prove that the violations never occurred, that creates a pattern of false reporting. And if you happen to catch someone in the act of observing your property or documenting supposed violations, even better. Just make sure your cameras only cover your own property and the public street. You cannot point them at your neighbors' yards, or you will create a whole new set of legal problems." I left his office $500 poorer but with a plan. I spent the next week researching home security systems, reading reviews, and comparing features. I finally settled on a comprehensive system with 4 wireless cameras that would cover my front yard, driveway, side yard, and backyard. Each camera had night vision, motion detection, and stored footage to a cloud server with date and time stamps that could not be manipulated. The system cost me $1,800 installed, but it felt like the only way to protect myself and my home. The installation company, Secure Home Solutions, sent 2 technicians on a Tuesday morning in early May. They spent 4 hours mounting the cameras, running tests, and showing me how to access the footage through an app on my phone. I could view live feeds from anywhere, receive alerts when motion was detected, and review archived footage going back 30 days. "You will want to adjust the motion sensitivity," one of the technicians advised. "Otherwise, you will get alerts every time a car drives by or a squirrel runs across your lawn." "That is fine," I said. "I want to know everything that happens on this property." That first week with the cameras felt like overkill. I got alerts constantly and found myself checking the feeds obsessively, watching neighbors walk their dogs, cars drive past, and absolutely nothing interesting happening. My kids, Sophie and Max, came for the weekend and thought the cameras were cool. Sophie, who was 12, immediately started posing for them and making silly faces. "Dad, this is like being a YouTuber. You are recording everything now," she said, waving at the front door camera. "It is just for security, sweetheart, so we know the house is safe." Max, who was 9, was more practical. "Can you see if anyone tries to steal packages?" "Exactly. And it helps me keep track of things like when I mow the lawn or take out the trash." "Why do you need to keep track of that?" Sophie asked. I did not want to burden them with the HOA drama, so I just shrugged. "Adult stuff, boring homeowner things." The cameras proved their worth exactly 11 days after installation. I was at work, sitting in my office at the mechanical engineering firm where I worked as a project manager, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert at 1:43 in the afternoon. I opened the app expecting to see a delivery truck or a neighbor walking by, but instead I saw a silver Lexus SUV parked in front of my house. A woman got out, walked up my driveway, and stood in front of my garage door taking photos with her phone. Even on the small phone screen, I recognized Patricia Dunford immediately with her blonde hair and lavender cardigan. I watched the live feed as she walked around the front of my house, taking photos from multiple angles. She crouched down near my trash cans, which were tucked neatly against the side of the house exactly where they were supposed to be, and appeared to be taking more pictures. Then she walked along the side of my property line, looking closely at my fence and landscaping. The whole inspection took about 8 minutes before she got back in her Lexus and drove away. My hands were shaking as I immediately opened my email. The footage was automatically saved to the cloud, but I also downloaded the specific clips to my computer and phone, making sure I had multiple copies. This was it. This was the evidence I needed. Patricia was personally coming to my property to document supposed violations, which meant she was likely the source of all the anonymous complaints. I called Marcus Webb immediately. "I got her. I have video of the HOA president at my house taking photos." "Okay, slow down. Tell me exactly what you have." I described the footage in detail. Marcus listened carefully, and I could hear him typing notes. "This is good, Ryan. This establishes that she is personally monitoring your property. Now we need to connect this to the actual complaints." "When was the last violation letter you received?" "About a week ago. Something about my exterior paint having scuff marks that needed to be addressed." "Okay, keep monitoring. If she comes back and you receive another complaint shortly after, that establishes the pattern. In the meantime, send me a copy of that footage. I want to review it carefully." 3 days later, Patricia came back, This time it was on a Saturday morning at 9:15. I was inside having coffee when the motion alert went off. I pulled up the feed and watched as she got out of her Lexus again, this time with what looked like a clipboard. She walked slowly around my front yard, occasionally making notes on her clipboard. She took more photos of my house, my mailbox, and my driveway. She even walked up to my front door and appeared to be examining the welcome mat and the small potted plant I had placed next to the door. I was tempted to go outside and confront her, but Marcus had advised against direct confrontation without witnesses or additional documentation. So I just watched through my phone, recording her every move. She spent 12 minutes inspecting my property before leaving. On Monday, I received an email from the HOA. Another violation notice, this time claiming that I had placed unauthorized decorations on my front porch in violation of Section 15.7 of the Community Guidelines. The decoration in question, according to the email, was a potted plant that had not been approved by the Architectural Review Committee. It was a single potted geranium that I had bought at Home Depot for $12. I forwarded the email to Marcus immediately, along with the footage from Saturday morning showing Patricia documenting my front porch. Marcus called me within an hour. "We have her. This is a clear pattern of harassment. She is personally inspecting your property and then filing violation complaints about things that are either not violations at all or are so minor that they would never normally warrant HOA action. The potted plant thing is particularly absurd because I reviewed your bylaws, and there is no specific prohibition against small planters on front porches. So, what do we do now? We go to the HOA board meeting. The next one is scheduled for next Thursday according to their website. You are allowed to attend as a homeowner and address the board during the public comment period. We are going to present this evidence and demand that these complaints be withdrawn and that Patricia recuse herself from any further matters involving your property. You think that will work? Honestly, probably not immediately. HOA boards tend to close ranks, especially around their president, but it puts them on notice that you are serious and that you have documentation. It also creates a record that we can use if this goes to court. Court, you think it will come to that? Marcus paused. I hope not. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming. But if Patricia continues this harassment, you may need to file a lawsuit for injunctive relief and damages. Having this evidence and having presented it to the board first will strengthen your case significantly. The week leading up to the HOA board meeting was tense. Patricia came by my house twice more, both times captured clearly on camera. I received 2 more violation notices, one about my mailbox supposedly not being properly maintained, and another about my lawn having uneven patches. Both complaints were filed within 24 hours of Patricia's visits. The pattern was undeniable. I spent hours preparing for the board meeting, organizing my evidence chronologically, and printing out still frames from the video footage showing Patricia at my property with corresponding violation notices. Marcus helped me draft a brief statement to present during public comments. We kept it factual and unemotional, just laying out the timeline and evidence. The board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance with a meeting room that could hold maybe 40 people. I arrived 15 minutes early with Marcus, and we took seats in the back row. A handful of other homeowners were scattered around the room, most of them looking bored and checking their phones. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia was in the center seat, flanked by 4 other board members whose names I had to look up on the HOA website because I had never met them. There was Donald Pritchett, the vice president, a retired accountant in his 60s with thick glasses. Next to him was Brenda Carmichael, the treasurer, a heavy-set woman in her 50s who taught at the local elementary school. On Patricia's other side sat Gary Morrison, the secretary, a thin, nervous-looking man in his 40s who worked in pharmaceutical sales. The fifth board member was Linda Wu, an at-large member who was a real estate agent specializing in the Meadowbrook Heights area. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp, her voice echoing slightly in the room. They went through standard agenda items, approving the minutes from the previous meeting, discussing the budget for landscaping the common areas, and reviewing proposals for resurfacing the tennis courts. It was all incredibly boring, and I understood why so few homeowners bothered to attend these meetings. Finally, after nearly 40 minutes, Patricia announced the public comment period. Any homeowner may address the board for up to 3 minutes on any matter of concern. Please state your name and address for the record. I stood up, my heart pounding. Marcus gave me an encouraging nod. I walked to the front of the room and placed my folder of evidence on a small podium that faced the board table. My name is Ryan Kellerman. I live at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. I have been a homeowner in this community for 7 months, and in that time, I have received 12 violation notices from this HOA for supposed violations of the community guidelines. Patricia's expression did not change, but I saw her grip her pen a little tighter. I have reviewed every single one of these complaints carefully, and I can state with absolute certainty that none of them were valid. I have maintained my property in full compliance with the HOA bylaws. I have documentation including photos, receipts, and video footage that proves this. I opened my folder and pulled out the printed timeline. More importantly, I have discovered who has been filing these complaints and why they are false. Over the past 3 weeks, I have had security cameras installed on my property. These cameras have captured Patricia Dunford, the president of this HOA, coming to my house on 5 separate occasions to photograph and document my property. There was a murmur from the other homeowners in the room. I saw Brenda Carmichael lean forward, suddenly interested. Patricia's face had gone pale. Each time Mrs. Dunford visited my property, I received a violation notice within 24 to 48 hours. The violations cited in these notices directly correspond to areas Mrs. Dunford photographed during her visits. I have video evidence, and I have the corresponding complaint letters, all of which I am prepared to present to this board or to a court if necessary. I place still frames from the videos on the podium, each one clearly showing Patricia on my property with timestamps. These complaints are not anonymous reports from concerned neighbors, as Mrs. Dunford has repeatedly claimed. They are false reports being filed directly by the HOA president in what I can only characterize as targeted harassment. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. Mr. Kellerman, you cannot come into a board meeting and make these kinds of accusations without proof. I have proof. I just offered to present it. Would you like to see the videos? Marcus stood up from the back. If I may, I am Marcus Webb, attorney for Mr. Kellerman. We have extensive documentation of this pattern of harassment, including video surveillance showing Mrs. Dunford conducting personal inspections of Mr. Kellerman's property immediately prior to filing violation complaints. We are prepared to present this evidence to the full board, and we are requesting that all violations against Mr. Kellerman be withdrawn and that Mrs. Dunford recuse herself from any further matters involving his property. Donald Pritchett, the vice president, cleared his throat. Patricia, is this true? Have you been personally going to Mr. Kellerman's house? I have every right as HOA president to inspect properties when complaints are received, Patricia said, her voice rising. "This is part of my duties as outlined in the bylaws." "But Mr. Kellerman is claiming the complaints are coming from you, not from other residents," Brenda Carmichael said. "That would be highly irregular." "I am simply doing my job," Patricia insisted. "Mr. Kellerman has been a problem since he moved into this neighborhood. Multiple residents have expressed concerns." "Name one," I said. "Name a single resident who has complained about my property." Patricia's mouth opened and closed. "That information is confidential." "It is convenient that every complaint is anonymous and confidential, is it not?" Marcus said. "Mr. Kellerman has a right to face his accusers. These anonymous complaints, combined with video evidence of the HOA president personally monitoring his property, create a clear case of harassment and abuse of authority." Gary Morrison, the secretary, looked extremely uncomfortable. "I think we need to review this evidence in closed session. This is a serious allegation." "I agree," Linda Wu said. "If what Mr. Kellerman is saying is true, this is a major problem for the HOA. We could be exposed to significant liability." Patricia was gripping the edge of the table now, her knuckles white. "This is ridiculous. Mr. Kellerman is trying to distract from his own failure to comply with community standards." "Show us the videos," Brenda said firmly. "Right now. If you have nothing to hide, then let us see exactly what Mr. Kellerman has recorded." Marcus pulled out his laptop and connected it to the projector screen that the board used for presentations. Within moments, the footage from the first camera capture appeared on the screen, showing Patricia's silver Lexus pulling up to my house. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner. We played through all 5 visits, each one showing Patricia spending significant time photographing and documenting my property. The room was silent except for the audio from the videos. When the last clip finished, Brenda turned to Patricia. "You want to explain this?" "I was verifying complaints," Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "When we receive reports of violations, someone has to confirm them before sending official notices." "But who filed the initial complaints?" Donald asked. "Because what this looks like is you going to his house looking for violations and then filing complaints based on what you find. That is not how the system is supposed to work." "Multiple residents have expressed concerns," Patricia repeated, but she would not make eye contact with anyone. "Then show us the complaint forms," Brenda said. "Every complaint is supposed to be documented in writing, even anonymous ones. Show us the original complaint forms that prompted these verification visits." Patricia hesitated. "I would need to retrieve them from my files." "You do not have them here?" Gary asked. "You bring all the other HOA documents to board meetings. Why would you not have the complaint records for a case that has generated 12 violation notices?" The silence stretched out. I could see the realization dawning on the other board members' faces. There were no complaint forms because there had been no complaints from other residents. Patricia had been making everything up. Linda Wu shook her head slowly. "Patricia, this is really bad. If you have been filing false complaints against a homeowner, that is not just an abuse of your position. It could expose the HOA to a lawsuit." "I want all 12 violation notices withdrawn immediately," Marcus said. "I also want a written apology from the HOA and an agreement that Mrs. Dunford will have no further involvement in any matters related to Mr. Kellerman's property. If those conditions are not met, we will be filing a lawsuit for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process." Donald looked at the other board members. "I move that we go into executive session to discuss this matter." "Seconded," Brenda said immediately. "All in favor?" Donald asked. 4 hands went up. Patricia sat motionless, not voting. "Mr. Kellerman, Mr. Webb, if you could wait outside, the board needs to discuss this privately," Donald said. Marcus and I stepped out into the hallway. I could feel adrenaline coursing through my system. Through the door, we could hear raised voices, though we could not make out specific words. The discussion went on for nearly 30 minutes. "That went well," Marcus said quietly. "The board is clearly concerned about liability, which is good for us. I think Patricia is done." "You think they will actually remove her as president?" "Maybe not immediately, but they will have to take some action. What she did is indefensible, and now there are witnesses and documented evidence. At minimum, they will have to withdraw the violations and keep her away from your property." Finally, the door opened and Gary Morrison stepped out. "You can come back in now." We returned to our seats. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Patricia was still sitting at the table, but she looked deflated, her face red and her eyes watery. The other board members looked uncomfortable and angry. Donald cleared his throat. "After reviewing the evidence and discussing this matter, the board has voted to take the following actions. First, all violation notices issued to Ryan Kellerman are hereby withdrawn and will be removed from HOA records. Second, any fines that have been assessed will be waived. Third, Patricia Dunford is formally censured by this board for conduct unbecoming an HOA officer. Fourth, Mrs. Dunford is recused from any and all matters involving Mr. Kellerman's property going forward." "That is a good start," Marcus said, "but we also need assurance that this behavior will not continue with other homeowners." "We are not done," Brenda said, her voice cold. "The board is also voting to conduct a full audit of all violation complaints filed during Patricia's tenure as president. If we find evidence of similar patterns with other homeowners, additional action will be taken." Patricia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just trying to maintain community standards. This neighborhood was beautiful before people like him moved in and started ignoring the rules." "People like me," I said. "What does that mean?" She did not answer, but the implication hung in the air. I realized then that this had never been about trash cans or lawn maintenance or potted plants. Patricia had targeted me from the beginning for reasons that had nothing to do with HOA rules. Maybe it was because I was divorced or new to the neighborhood, or just because I was an easy target for someone who got off on wielding petty power over others. "Mrs. Dunford, I strongly suggest you say nothing further," Linda Wu said. "You have already created enough liability for this association." The meeting adjourned shortly after, with the board agreeing to send me written confirmation of their decisions within 5 business days. As people filed out, several homeowners approached me to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Patricia. One elderly man named George said he had been dealing with similar harassment, but had been too intimidated to fight back. "She went after my wife about our garden gnomes," he said. "Claimed they were not in keeping with community aesthetics. We have had those gnomes for 30 years. I am glad someone finally stood up to her." Marcus and I drove separately back to our homes, but he called me once I was on the road. That could not have gone better. The board completely threw her under the bus, which means they know she is in the wrong and they are trying to protect the HOA from liability. "Keep your cameras running, though. People like Patricia do not always give up easily." He was right to be cautious. Over the next week, Patricia did not return to my property, but I started receiving anonymous text messages from an unknown number. The messages were vague but threatening, things like, "You will regret embarrassing me, and this is not over." I forwarded all of them to Marcus, who advised me to document everything but not respond. The written confirmation from the HOA arrived exactly 5 business days after the board meeting, signed by Donald Pritchett as acting president. Patricia had apparently been placed on administrative leave pending the audit of her conduct. The letter confirmed that all violations had been withdrawn, apologized for any inconvenience, and assured me that the matter was resolved. But the anonymous texts continued. They escalated from vague threats to more specific ones, including references to my kids and their school schedule. That crossed a line for me. I went to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and filed a report, bringing printouts of all the text messages. The officer who took my statement, a Detective Sarah Reeves, listened carefully to the whole story. "You have any proof that these texts are coming from Patricia Dunford?" she asked. "No direct proof, but the timing is suspicious." They started right after the HOA board meeting where I exposed her filing false complaints. "The number is blocked." "Yes, it shows up as unknown." Detective Reeves made notes on her computer. "We can try to subpoena the phone records, but that takes time and we need to establish that there is a credible threat. References to your children and their school schedule could qualify, especially combined with the documented history of harassment. I will open a case file and see what we can find out." 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Reeves. "Mr. Kellerman, we ran the phone number through our system and traced it to a prepaid cell phone purchased at a convenience store in your neighborhood. The store had security footage, and we were able to identify the purchaser. Patricia Dunford. Yes, we have clear video of her buying the phone 3 days before the first text message was sent to you. Combined with the content of the messages and the documented history you provided, we have enough for criminal charges." My stomach dropped. This had escalated beyond anything I had anticipated. "What kind of charges?" "Harassment, stalking, and potentially making terroristic threats because of the references to your children. North Carolina takes threats against minors very seriously. I am going to request a warrant for her arrest." Arrest? The word felt surreal. This was my HOA president, a middle-aged woman in a lavender cardigan who cared too much about property values. But she had also made me fear for my safety and the safety of my children. She had abused her authority, filed false reports, and then threatened my family when I stood up to her. Yes, arrest. Mr. Kellerman, what this woman did goes beyond a petty HOA dispute. She engaged in sustained harassment, abuse of her position, and then made threats that specifically mentioned your children. That is criminal conduct. Patricia Dunford was arrested on a Thursday afternoon. I know this because it was all over the neighborhood Facebook group within an hour. Someone posted a photo of a police car in her driveway and wild speculation about what had happened. By evening, the local news had picked up the story. "HOA president arrested for harassment" was the headline on Channel 9's website. The story gained traction quickly, probably because it fit into a familiar narrative that people loved. Tyrannical HOA president abusing power and getting their comeuppance. The news reporters reached out to me for interviews, but Marcus advised me to decline. "Let the criminal case play out. You do not want to say anything that could complicate the prosecution." The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia from her position as president. Donald Pritchett was appointed acting president, and the board issued a statement apologizing to all homeowners and promising reforms to the complaint process. They also announced that the audit of Patricia's tenure had revealed similar patterns of harassment against at least 3 other homeowners, all of whom were being contacted directly. Patricia's case moved through the court system with surprising speed. Her attorney tried to argue that the text messages were just venting and did not constitute real threats, but the prosecutor had a strong case with the prepaid phone purchase, the content of the messages, and the documented history of harassment. In late June, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to misdemeanor stalking and harassment charges, and in exchange, the prosecutor dropped the more serious terroristic threat charges. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, and was required to attend anger management counseling. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of me, my children, or my property. As part of the plea agreement, Patricia was required to resign from any and all HOA positions and was barred from serving in any community leadership role during her probation. The sentencing hearing was the last time I saw Patricia Dunford in person. She stood before the judge looking diminished and defeated, nothing like the imperious HOA president who had made my life miserable for months. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she mumbled a brief apology that sounded more resentful than sincere. I let my commitment to community standards cloud my judgment. I apologized to Mr. Kellerman and to the Meadowbrook Heights community. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Dunford, you did not just let your judgment be clouded. You engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against a neighbor, abused your position of authority, and then made threats against his children when he stood up to you. That is not being overly committed to community standards. That is being a bully. I hope you use this probation period to seriously reflect on your behavior." After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with Marcus. The July sun was brutal, and I was sweating through my shirt, but I felt lighter than I had in months. "It is over," Marcus said. "She cannot bother you anymore. If she violates the restraining order or contacts you in any way, she goes to jail." I never thought it would go this far. When I installed those cameras, I just wanted to prove the complaints were false. I did not expect criminal charges and arrests. Sometimes standing up to bullies means things escalate before they get better. But you did the right thing. You documented everything, you presented evidence, and you let the system work. A lot of people would have just given up and either suffered in silence or moved away. I thought about that as I drove home to Meadowbrook Heights. How many other homeowners had Patricia harassed over the years? How many had just paid the fines or followed her arbitrary demands because fighting back seemed too difficult? The audit had found at least 3 others, but I suspected there were more who never came forward. The neighborhood was different after Patricia's arrest. The HOA board, now led by Donald Pritchett, implemented a series of reforms. All complaints had to be submitted in writing with the complainant's name and address. No more anonymous reports. A 3-member review committee was established to evaluate all complaints before violation notices could be sent. Homeowners accused of violations were given the right to present evidence and appeal decisions before any fines were assessed. And most importantly, board members were prohibited from personally inspecting properties without either a written complaint from another homeowner or approval from the full board. The changes felt like common sense, the kind of basic fairness that should have existed all along. But HOAs often operated in legal gray areas with broad authority and limited oversight. It took Patricia's abusive conduct being exposed publicly for the system to change. My cameras stayed up, and I kept them running. Not because I was worried about Patricia anymore, but because they had proven their value. I captured package thieves twice in the following months and was able to provide footage to neighbors whose mail was stolen. The cameras caught a hit-and-run driver who clipped my mailbox in August, giving me clear license plate footage for my insurance claim. They recorded my kids playing in the yard, creating little everyday memories I might have otherwise forgotten. Sophie started middle school that fall, and Max began 4th grade. They adjusted to the regular custody schedule, spending weekends and some weeknights with me in the house that finally felt like home rather than a battlefield. I planted a garden in the backyard, added a fire pit with proper HOA approval, and even got a dog, a rescue mutt named Charlie who barked at every car that drove by, setting off my camera alerts constantly. The neighborhood gradually returned to normal, or perhaps normal for the first time in years. I met more of my neighbors and discovered that many of them had been as frustrated with Patricia's authoritarian approach as I was. George, the man with the garden gnomes, became a good friend. We would have beers on my back patio while our dogs played in the yard. He told me stories about Patricia's reign of terror that made my experience seem almost mild in comparison. She tried to fine me $300 because my wife planted tulips that were the wrong shade of yellow, he said, shaking his head. Wrong shade of yellow. Who even thinks like that? In September, the HOA held its annual election for board positions. Donald Pritchett ran unopposed for president and won easily. Brenda Carmichael stayed on as treasurer. 3 new board members were elected, including a young couple who had just moved to the neighborhood and wanted to make sure the HOA focused on actual issues like street maintenance and common area upkeep, rather than harassing homeowners about petty aesthetic concerns. I considered running for the board myself, but decided against it. I had spent enough time and energy on HOA politics. I just wanted to live my life, raise my kids on the weekends, and enjoy my home without drama. The reforms the board had implemented seemed genuine, and I was content to let others handle the community leadership. Patricia Dunford moved out of Meadowbrook Heights in October. The for sale sign went up in her yard one morning, and within 3 weeks, there was a sold sticker across it. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she had taken a job in another state and wanted a fresh start. Good riddance, as far as I was concerned. I hoped wherever she ended up, she would find something better to do with her time than harassing her neighbors. My last encounter with anything related to Patricia came in November when I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, postmarked from Virginia, and signed with her name. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was not long. She apologized again for her conduct, this time sounding more genuine than her courtroom mumbling. She admitted that she had been dealing with personal issues, including a divorce of her own and the death of her mother, and had channeled her anger and need for control into her HOA role. She acknowledged that what she had done to me and others was wrong, and that she was in therapy trying to understand why she had behaved that way. "I do not expect forgiveness," she wrote. "I just wanted you to know that I am genuinely sorry for the harm I caused you and your children. You deserved better, and I hope you are able to enjoy your home in peace." I read the letter twice, then filed it away in the folder with all the other documentation from the case. I was not ready to forgive Patricia, and I was not sure I ever would be. But I appreciated the acknowledgement, however late it came. And I recognized that hurt people often hurt people, that Patricia's cruelty had likely come from a place of pain in her own life. That did not excuse what she had done, but it made it more comprehensible. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience during a quiet evening at home. The kids were with their mom for the week. Charlie was snoring on the couch next to me, and I was scrolling through months of camera footage, archiving files and clearing space on the cloud server. I watched time-lapse compilations of my front yard through the seasons, the trees changing color, leaves falling, the first snow in December dusting my lawn. I saw myself coming and going to work, My kids arriving and departing, neighbors walking dogs, mail carriers delivering packages. All the mundane rhythms of suburban life, captured and preserved. The cameras had saved me. That was the simple truth. Without that video evidence, I would have been helpless against Patricia's false complaints, trapped in a system that allowed anonymous accusations with no way to defend myself. The $1,800 I had spent on the security system had been the best investment I could have made. It had not just protected my property, it had protected my sanity and my rights. But more than that, standing up to Patricia had reminded me that I was not as beaten down by life as I had thought. The divorce had left me feeling diminished, like I had failed at something fundamental. Moving to Meadowbrook Heights was supposed to be a fresh start, and instead, I had immediately faced a new kind of harassment. But I had fought back. I had documented the abuse, presented evidence, and refused to be bullied into submission. That mattered. On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Sophie and Max were with me for the holiday, and I invited George and his wife Martha, along with a few other neighbors I had gotten to know. We ate too much food, played board games, and let the kids stay up late watching movies. At one point, George raised his glass of wine in a toast to Ryan for having the guts to stand up to our neighborhood tyrant. You made this community better for all of us. I felt embarrassed by the attention but clinked glasses with everyone. I just installed some cameras and told the truth. Anyone would have done the same. No, Martha said firmly. Most people would have just paid the fines or moved away. You fought back, and that took courage. Maybe it did. Or maybe I had just been stubborn and angry enough not to give up. Either way, it was over. Patricia was gone. The HOA was reformed, and my home was finally the peaceful refuge I had wanted it to be. The cameras kept recording through the night, capturing the warm glow of Christmas lights, friends leaving with waves and hugs, my kids asleep on the couch, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and new toys. Just another normal evening in Meadowbrook Heights, preserved digitally for as long as I chose to keep the files. As I carried Max to bed and tucked Sophie in her room, I thought about how different things might have been if I had not installed those cameras. I probably would have given up eventually, overwhelmed by the constant violation notices and fines. I might have sold the house at a loss and moved somewhere else, letting Patricia win through sheer exhaustion. Or I might have just become increasingly bitter and resentful, paying the fines while hating my home and my neighborhood. Instead, I had evidence. I had truth on my side, captured at high definition with timestamps that could not be disputed. And that evidence had been enough to change everything. The following year brought continued peace. The new HOA board focused on actual community improvements. They repaved the streets, upgraded the playground equipment in the common area, and organized neighborhood events like a summer block party and a Halloween parade. These were the kinds of things an HOA should be doing, bringing people together rather than finding new ways to find them. I never received another violation notice. My lawn was mowed on schedule, my trash cans were properly stored, and my single-potted geranium bloomed cheerfully on my front porch without any complaints from the Architectural Review Committee. The cameras recorded it all, a running documentary of ordinary suburban life. In the spring, a new family moved into Patricia's old house. They were young with twin babies and seemed overwhelmed but happy. I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood, making a point to let them know that the HOA was under new management and much more reasonable than it used to be. We heard there was some drama, the husband said carefully. That is all behind us now. Just maintain your property, follow the basic rules, and you will be fine. And if you ever get a complaint that seems unfair, document everything and do not be afraid to fight back." He looked surprised by that advice, but I meant it. One of the lessons I had learned from the whole Patricia ordeal was that documentation and evidence were everything. In disputes with authority figures, whether it was an HOA board, a boss, or any other power structure, being able to prove your version of events was often the difference between justice and injustice. The cameras had given me that power. They had leveled the playing field and allowed truth to prevail over false accusations. And while I never wanted to go through that kind of stress again, I was glad I had the tools and the determination to stand up for myself when it mattered. By the summer, the whole Patricia situation felt like ancient history. New dramas and concerns occupied the neighborhood gossip, most of them far less serious. There was a debate about whether to allow food trucks at the annual 4th of July celebration. Someone's teenager had been caught spray painting graffiti on the tennis court fence. A family had installed a trampoline without submitting the proper architectural review form, leading to a tense but ultimately resolved discussion about safety and insurance liability. Normal HOA stuff, in other words. Disagreements and rules and community standards, but without the underlying malice and abuse of power that had characterized Patricia's leadership. The system was working the way it was supposed to work, with checks and balances and fairness. I settled into a comfortable routine. Work during the week, kids on the weekends, regular maintenance on the house and yard. My life was not particularly exciting, but it was stable and peaceful, which was exactly what I needed after the chaos of the divorce and the HOA harassment. Sophie and Max were thriving, adjusting well to the split custody arrangement. Charlie the dog became the neighborhood favorite, beloved by every kid on the block, and through it all, my cameras kept recording. They had become such a normal part of the landscape that I barely thought about them anymore. Just another home security feature, like locks on the doors or a burglar alarm. I checked the footage occasionally, usually only when I got a motion alert or wanted to verify when a package had been delivered. But sometimes, late at night when I could not sleep, I would scroll back through the archived footage and watch the progression of seasons, the changing light, the steady march of days and weeks and months. There was something meditative about it, seeing time compressed and patterns emerging. The mail carrier arriving at the same time every afternoon. The neighbor's cat that cut through my yard on its morning rounds. The gradual growth of my lawn and garden as spring turned to summer. And there, in a few clips from the previous year, Patricia Dunford stalking around my property with her clipboard and camera phone, looking for violations that did not exist. Those clips were evidence of a specific moment in time, preserved forever in digital format. A record of injustice that had been corrected, of abuse that had been stopped. I thought about deleting them. I did not need to keep reliving that period of stress and conflict, but something made me hold onto the footage. Maybe it was a reminder of my own resilience, proof that I could stand up for myself when necessary. Or maybe it was just insurance, a guarantee that if Patricia ever violated her restraining order, or if anyone else tried similar tactics, I would have the means to defend myself again. The cameras had become more than just security devices. They were witnesses. They told the truth when people lied. They provided clarity when situations were murky. They protected not just my property but my rights and my reputation. As autumn returned and the trees around Meadowbrook Heights began their annual transformation, I found myself genuinely happy. My home was my own. My neighborhood was peaceful. My kids were healthy and adjusting well. I had friends in the community and a life that felt stable and manageable. The whole experience with Patricia had been terrible while it was happening, but in retrospect, it had taught me valuable lessons. I learned that bullies exist everywhere, even in suburban HOAs. I learned that documentation and evidence were powerful tools against false accusations. I learned that standing up for yourself often required resources, whether that was money for cameras and lawyers or the emotional strength to keep fighting when it would be easier to give up. Most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than I thought. The divorce had left me feeling defeated, but fighting back against Patricia had reminded me that I had agency and power. I did not have to accept injustice. I could fight back, present evidence, demand fairness, and sometimes, if I was persistent enough, I could win. On the anniversary of my first violation letter from Patricia, I opened a beer and sat on my back patio watching Charlie chase squirrels around the yard. The security camera mounted on the corner of the house recorded the scene, adding another few minutes of footage to the ever-growing archive of my life in Meadowbrook Heights. I thought about that first letter, the confusion and frustration I had felt reading Patricia's accusations about trash cans left on the street. I thought about the escalating complaints, the harassment, the stress of wondering what false violation would be alleged next. And then, I thought about the satisfaction of presenting that video evidence to the HOA board, watching Patricia's authority crumble as her lies were exposed. Justice had been served, not perfectly but adequately. Patricia had faced consequences for her actions. The HOA had reformed its policies. I had been vindicated and protected. The system had worked eventually because I had been willing to fight for what was right and because I had evidence to support my claims. The sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across my yard. The camera recorded it all in high definition, capturing the golden light and the peaceful suburban scene. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, responsibilities, and the normal challenges of daily life. But tonight, sitting in my own backyard with my dog and my beer and my cameras watching over everything, I felt genuinely content. The Karen was gone. The false reports had stopped. The harassment was over, and I was still here, living my life in peace in a home that truly belonged to me. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes documentation and truth are enough to overcome abuse of power. Sometimes installing a few security cameras can change everything. I raised my beer bottle toward the camera, offering a silent toast to technology, justice, and the simple pleasure of being left alone to live life on my own terms. The camera recorded the gesture, adding it to the archive, preserving this moment of quiet victory. Everything was exactly as it should be.